Welcome to the In Defense of the Fence podcast, everybody. The podcast where on the fencers go to see both sides just a little bit clearer. I'm Ryder.
And I'm Thinker.
And on today's episode, the 2024 presidential election is final and in the books. Donald Trump is now elected the 47th president of the United States. What happened with the Democrats? What does it mean? Also, a little portion at the end of Trump's new cabinet picks. Who are they and what do they plan to do? Let's get into it. Topic number one. Wow. How's your week been?
Oh, it's been... My fiance would say something to the effect of Mercury is in retrograde.
Yeah.
Whatever that means. It's been a ride, man. It has been a ride.
Yeah.
I think I was blindsided, just like you were blindsided, just like a lot of people were blindsided. And it's not just that Trump won, it's by how convincingly he won. That's been the shocking part for me this whole week. Watching the numbers roll in and seeing all the gains that he's made, not just the places that Harris has lost, but the gains that he made in certain areas that were shocking. And we're going to go over some of that today.
Yeah, we can do that right now. I mean, because they said this entire time that the race wasn't going to be close. And you know what? It wasn't, because she got dominated everywhere. So if you look here, this is Harris in 2024. This is Biden in 2020. This is the percent change over time. So you see all this motherfucking red? So that's the sign of Harris just getting wiped out in all the major counties around. Also, Trump 2024, Trump 2020. The percent change, you see all this green like money. Trump gained in almost every single county, about 90% of the counties nationwide. Also, any leads that Harris might have had, she lost multiple times. And you look at like Osceola County here, you look at like Miami-Dade County, you look at like Queens in New York, like, my God, Harris lost 21.2 percentage points in Queens. She still got Queens, but Trump gained 21.2%. Same thing with Brooklyn. Harris lost 11.6% in Brooklyn. Also, main one to look at, 21.8 percentage points in Macomb County, Michigan. Biden had won that county back in 2020. He won it by 8.1%. Harris lost it by 13.7, meaning Harris lost in a very blue county in Michigan 21.8 percentage points, causing her to lose that county. Same thing happened in Berks County, Pennsylvania. She lost 20.7 points, going from Biden's 8.2% lead in 2020 to a negative 12.5%. This is happening all over the country. Yeah. She has lost unanimously. And not only that, like you and I were looking at it, it's not just the swing states to be worried about. It's these safe blue states to worry about.
New York.
Yep.
A state that I thought was safely blue. Like never gonna turn red in my lifetime. Blue. And yet what was the point gain he made from 2020 to 2024 in New York as a whole?
He gained 6.2%.
Like
to her loss of 5.3% from Biden.
And those numbers make sense, but that means that a good portion of what she lost flipped. And that's...
Oh, yeah.
That doesn't mean that those people didn't vote for her and stayed home. They actively didn't vote for her and went out and voted for him.
We should note now that there's about 6.5 million voters less this time around than 2020. Yes. So that could affect things like the popular vote. We have no idea where it actually affected, but all we know is that there are about 6.5 million less voters this time around than in 2020. But nonetheless, Trump won the popular vote, and all around the country, we're seeing counties add up to overall state losses. Like New York, she lost steam in New York by 11.5% compared to Biden. Biden won the state by 23.2%. Harris, 11.7%, which means New York is going to get a lot of campaigning in 2028.
Oh, to joy.
I mean, the number, Like, do you think it gets to a point where half the country becomes swing states?
Oh boy. I mean, the way that these numbers are tilting, it certainly looks like that could be a possibility. I mean, he made positive yardage, as
Yeah.
they would say in
And
football.
and not only that, it was a multicultural demographic that he made
Yes.
gains with, you know?
Yes. I don't know if you want to like get into this a little bit. Like the Gen Z men is as good a place to start as any. Trump went hard after the Gen Z men. He showed up.
Mhm.
He was on the Joe Rogan podcast. What was it? Twice during his campaign.
Yeah.
And I know JD, and then JD Vance made an appearance on the podcast as well. He went on a ton of other podcasts that are, their numbers show that their main listening audience is young white men.
Yep.
And it worked. It clearly
Mhm.
worked. And this is one area that bothered me is when Harris didn't take the Joe Rogan. I was a little bit shocked because I at that point I was like, I don't know how you turn down that many listeners and that many potential voters. Joe Rogan's podcast numbers are insane. What was it?
Well, she turned him down because of, like, technical requests that they wanted, like, they wanted him
I
to come
know.
to her.
Yeah, I feel like you got to make it work though. I mean,
Well, they were
especially
campaigning, you know?
now, and maybe this is with the benefit of hindsight, but especially now, seeing the success that Trump had, I'd be shocked to see if in 2028 the Democrats don't do the same thing.
I mean, it's certainly possible because we see, one, ground game is not what it used to be, and nobody wants to, just because you knock on somebody's door and tell them to vote a certain way doesn't mean they're always going to do it. Also, Trump had no problem going on Joe Rogan because Trump wasn't worried about campaigning in swing states for like the past month. He was just
Yeah,
happy to dance and talk in Madison
that
Square Garden,
that's
you
another
know?
thing. Does campaigning in swing states matter anymore?
Well, I think it does. I just think there was so much up against them. I mean, when you're attached to the incumbent presidency and you say that when asked, even on The View, if there was anything that you would do differently than Joe Biden, the person who stepped down and you replaced, and you say nothing comes to mind, one, I thought that was probably the end right there. When you're the
Yeah,
incumbent and you can't look like the outsider candidate and inflation is happening, that's a losing strategy right there.
yeah.
And so Trump was probably just coasting in the last month, knowing that they could ride on immigration and the economy because people were always going to vote. They could tune out anything that he said as long as they thought that the economy would be better under him.
Well, and it makes me wonder whether or not the Republicans had somebody in their campaign that like knew something that the Democrats didn't. You didn't see a whole lot of panic from the Republican Party when Trump was doing all these rallies. Much to the surprise of a lot of Democratic news media, they were shouting about how like, oh, wow, how could he do this? This is such a dumb thing to
Mhm.
do during a campaign. Well,
Yeah,
clearly it worked.
yeah, and even his own advisors were trying to keep him on message by putting little notes in his teleprompter to answer more questions and stop dancing. But
Yeah.
like we even see that like I mean, like it's clear and it's been clear for probably decades now that political pundits are much more offended about the shit that he says than actual voters,
Than actual voters. And
especially when your paycheck is on the line. And it wasn't, there wasn't a huge gender gap like we thought it might be. Like if you look at the 18 to
no.
24 demographic, which is only 9% of the total electorate, it was pretty split down the middle with 54% voting a little bit more towards Democrat than 42% for Republicans. But then when you break it down to gender, men 18 to 19, 47% Democrat, 49% Republican. So even the men in that demographic are split down the middle. It's just there is an overwhelming majority to push them over the edge in almost every swing state.
Yeah.
What could have like been done differently?
The Democrats have to move away from identity politics. Do I like that? No. But what this election has shown is that nobody cares about identity politics when putting food on the table is a struggle.
Mhm.
Focusing on abortion, and I'm not saying that abortion didn't play a part. I mean, women voted overwhelmingly for Harris as well. Well, and maybe not as
Not
it
as
wasn't quite as
overwhelmingly as we thought.
overwhelmingly for Harris as what many were expecting. I
Yep.
think a lot of people were expecting that to look closer to the black vote, but it was a lot closer to the middle than I think many people were expecting.
They tried really hard, but abortion, if it affects anybody, it mainly affects women. And it
Mhm.
obviously they tried to tag it onto men by saying, hey, just men, think about your mother, think about your sister, think about your daughters. But again, when you're trying to really, really solidify the Gen Z men vote, that
Mhm.
doesn't apply to them because their mother is probably at the age where she's not having kids anymore. You're not
Yeah.
thinking about kids. You're not thinking about marriage. You are still in college if you're 18 to 22. It really is hard to get somebody to go out and vote for somebody else because the selfish vote, which is understandable, was for the economy. And that overwhelmingly voted Trump sweepingly into the presidency.
Yeah, if you look at it, it actually does break down that the young Gen Z vote doesn't care enough about those topics to vote on it or to go out to vote. And the older Gen Z are at that point where they do need to start thinking about families and paying for things. It's still the same issue, which is that they
Mhm.
need to afford it, and abortion doesn't directly relate to that.
Now, on the topic of abortion, though, there are a lot of propositions around the country that voted in to protect abortion. Do you think it was a mistake to have those on the ballot? Because my
Now I
argument
do.
would be because my argument would be a lot of them were sweepingly voted into existence, into the state's constitutions. My
Yeah.
argument to it is that they provided an opportunity to split your vote. If you were for Donald Trump on the economy, but against his position on a nationwide abortion ban or whatever you want to call it, that gave you an option to split your vote. You could vote Donald Trump in for the economy, but then protect your abortion rights by voting
Yeah.
in the proposition that you had on the state ballot.
Before the election, wouldn't have agreed with you. After the
Yeah.
election, absolutely agree with you. You can't argue against the numbers. And I
Yeah.
think the overwhelming support for these propositions on a state by state basis shows that giving people the option to do that and protect themselves while voting in somebody who wants to take away those protections for others in states that might not have those protections.
Yep.
You're right. It gives a permission structure to vote for him on the economy, as you said, and stay safely in your little state bubble and not have to worry about it.
And really
And
that boils down to the idea that fear conquers joy every time. So, okay, you have an in to protect abortion, but if you really wanted people to vote for Kamala, you wouldn't give them an out on the
yeah,
ballot.
yeah, because that fear is what's going to drive them to vote for a candidate that's going to protect them as opposed to a proposition that's going to protect them. And,
Mhm.
that's one thing that Trump has done very, 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 very well is run
Yeah.
on fear. Immigration and the economy. He stuck to two pillars that hauled up his entire campaign, pushing fear on both of those issues, and that's all he needed to win.
Well, it also just shows you, like, kind of going back to what we talked about with media pundits being so much more offended about Puerto Rican comments than the
Mm.
average Puerto Rican person. And, of course, we can't categorize them in one giant group. But at the same time, Trump dominated the news cycle like he always does because of all these things, whether he's talking about Arnold Palmer's dick size, whether he's talking about the state of Puerto Rico, whether he's talking about any of the stuff
Yeah,
that we've clearly seen now that voters don't care about. A lot of people have already come out saying that they absolutely hate the guy, but they think he's better on the economy. So he can come out
yeah,
and say anything. They'll put their head in the sands and they'll vote for him anyway, as long as they think that he's good for the economy. But the media constantly ran and ran and ran every single thing that he said, pushing any discussion about Kamala's policies out of primetime television. They fell for it. It was the same thing in
if
2016.
I'm Democratic mainstream media, I feel stupid right now. And the reason I feel stupid is because Trump has known that all news in related to him is good news
Yeah.
for years now.
Mhm.
He's known this since his term in office. He's been playing the same game
Mhm.
with the mainstream media since he was president, and it has
Yeah.
always worked. Every single time it has worked. And the Democratic mainstream media has not figured it out yet. I hope they have
Yeah.
this time, but
Yeah.
they up till this election they hadn't figured it out. They
Yeah.
thought hammer him and all these crazy things he's doing. Nobody's going to vote for this lunatic. Look at this man. Look at this crazy man dancing on stage. What a
Yeah.
weirdo.
He's
These
so
people are
old.
weird.
Yeah. Why is
It,
his playlist like this? They're giving him airtime exactly
yeah.
what he wanted. We have to stop reacting to every little thing that he says. Does that justify what he says? No, we're not being
Oh,
permissive. We're just not going down the rabbit hole. And there is so much more to be discussed, like
because
Project 2025, Harris's economic policy that was never given the light of day.
clearly focusing on those specific
Mm,
things does not work. It doesn't
yeah.
work. So we need to shift strategy. We need to get away from focusing on the craziness and the drama and get back to focusing on policies and finding a way to explain why their policies don't work and why the Democratic policies do work in a way that the general public will understand. Because it's not enough just to explain why theirs don't and ours do. Democratic Party's been doing that this entire campaign. They don't do it in a way that people can relate to.
Mhm.
It comes out as this high society jargon and intellectual speak that the average citizen doesn't know or care about. I mean, Harris did a good job towards the end of talking about lowering the price for groceries in her campaign ads, but at that point I think it was a too little too late. I think she waited too long to get her message to a level where the layman can understand.
She had to hold herself to such a high, stringent standard. What the end result coming out, I mean, aside from having like Lil Jon at the DNC, everything else was textbook politician. I mean, she didn't come off as an outsider, and it almost felt like they were so bound that she couldn't. Because one, I mean, you could argue a double standard because of her like running like a campaign. Not only the fact she also had 90 days to do it, and then
Yeah,
secondly, she was still literally tied to the current administration. So there was only so
yeah,
much that she really could say, and it was so formal. It was like, "Good evening, everybody. Good evening," but like Obama was the outsider. Obama
yeah,
came out of nowhere with that
yeah,
gusto, with that gravitas, and he could talk down to the people. The only person really on her ticket that could do that was like Pete Buttigieg to a degree, and
yeah.
definitely Tim Walz. We can spend a lot of time doing what everybody else is doing and just blaming Biden for deciding to run for a second term. I think that ship has sailed. I think that horse has kind of been beaten to death at this point. We know one of the biggest flaws was that Biden decided to run again, but
Yeah.
it is what it is at this point. The divide isn't so much men and women as much as it is college educated and non college educated. Because
Yeah.
Harris lost a lot of the Latino vote, and a lot of the Latino vote turned out to be non college educated. They
Yeah.
almost vote in tandem with non college educated white voters,
Yeah.
and it created this multicultural, non college educated coalition against
Yeah.
the college educated. And like it's
Yes.
like elitist versus working class, and that
Yeah.
shows more of a divide than anything.
Yeah. And I think that that divide has been steadily growing over the last decade. A decade ago, I was in college. So,
Yeah.
when I went into college, the topic had just started to come up that maybe you don't need a college education to be successful. College is becoming so expensive that that divide is driven in large part by the inability to afford a higher education, which again just comes back to people's ability to afford anything.
Yeah. Looking at the numbers now, those who never attended college, 63% voted Republican, 35% voted Democrat. Anybody with a bachelor's or higher was about 53 to 59% for Kamala, 45 to 38% Trump. The biggest gap turns out to be college versus non-college. And then, like when you subdivide it, yes, you can get into race, but it is overwhelmingly non-college for Republicans, which, can translate into working class, not all working class, but like it just shows
Mhm.
the Democrats are out of favor with the working class.
Yeah, and what that means is that the Democrats, the next election cycle, have to figure out how to get back in touch with the working class. Because
Mm,
the numbers on college educated versus non college educated individuals in this country, it's going down, which means that if the number of college educated individuals in this country continues to go down and the Democrats continue to not be able to connect with the working class, that's going to ensure an environment where the party that clearly has an advantage with that working class, which happens to be the Republican Party, they're going to
mhm.
have an advantage going forward in every single election cycle moving forward. And, for me, that just comes back down to the Democrats making their message more digestible to the working class.
Yeah. Well, there's an argument that could be made that the Democrats will maybe, if they get their shit together, do better in 2026 for the midterms because the midterms is mainly comprised of college educated voters. The non
Yeah,
college usually don't come out in droves like they do during the general election. So
yeah,
there's a chance that the Democrats could maybe gain some seats back in the midterms. But I mean, that all depends on how they revolutionize the party, which is what they're actively talking about
yeah.
doing now. So, like, I don't know, for 2028, who's an outsider that you could see just coming in and like steamrolling the party? Is it a Josh Shapiro? Is it a Walls?
I would love to see a Josh Shapiro ticket personally. I've never met a Democrat who is better at making big ideas digestible to the layman better than him.
I don't
He, and
know.
not only
Obama's up
that,
there
he
for
is
me.
not only that, he is very, very good at high tension situations. And people like him. He just has this air about him that's likable. Now, the one concern I have of that is the fact, him being gay.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and go back to identity politics. And Harris did a good job of not making this campaign about the fact that she was a woman running for president like Hillary did.
Well, she
But
almost had to because they immediately called her a DEI hire.
yeah,
Gay, Jewish. If you have the anti-Semitic, anti-LGBT, anti-woke side coming out in droves against that, like, does that present a winning argument for the Democrats? Does that speak working class? Do you think like he could reach them?
I, it's going to depend on where we are as a country in 2028.
Yeah.
um, I think that if Trump does enough damage in the White House, that maybe people will vote Democrat just to get away from the damage he's done. But I don't want to speculate that that's what's going to happen. We don't know what Trump's going to do just yet. We have a lot of ideas and a lot of speculation based on what's been said over the course of this campaign, but
Yeah.
he's not in office yet and he won't be in office for another 2 months. We can make guesses based on who he's been picking so far,
Yeah.
but it doesn't do anybody any good to speculate on what is going to happen in the next 4 years just yet.
I think no matter what happens, I think Trump becomes the establishment at the end of the 4 years. Looking for another outsider. I mean, that's generally what happens. I mean, like, this is a second Trump term. Usually by the second term for any president, they become the establishment where somebody's looking for a revolutionary change.
Yeah.
Now,
Well, and that
I
it's
don't
just
know
gonna,
who that looks like, but
and it's going to have to be somebody revolutionary because I get the impression that JD Vance will probably try to run, at which point he will have the same problem that Harris did this time, which is being the vice president to the incumbent president.
possibly, unless they're still loyal to him, because he will lease his name to the Republican Party, like he's leased his name on every building that he's ever owned or
Yeah.
leased, I guess. And all it takes is somebody to just shout out the Messiah name of "I supported Donald Trump," and whew, that crowd
Yeah.
comes running.
I mean, and again, I think that's going to come down to what he does
Unless
while
he
he's in
becomes
office.
hate despised, yeah,
And that's what I mean is it's going to come down to how he does in his next term. It's going to depend on how many promises to his base that he keeps.
do you think identity politics can ever be a winning message?
I think it could be. I don't think that now's the time.
When you have
Uh
high inflation, no, you're not
no,
you're not
high
translating and
inflation.
reaching those people.
Yeah, no. Identity politics isn't going to work. It's never going to work when people have a hard time affording things. And even things like what my kid is learning in school
Yeah.
matters less than whether or not I can feed my kid when they come back from school.
Right,
You know?
exactly. And here's my biggest bone to pick with the Democrats in their current form is that
Mhm.
just like immigration, just like we talked about, America, despite all of its pomp and circumstance and championing of bringing in new and innovative cultures, we have been absolutely terrible at assimilation, whether it was
Yeah.
immigration, whether it was an LGBT community, anything like that. Because rather than just accepting somebody for their confusion and saying, hey, my community and my identity, especially, and you look at Gen Z men, because never before has masculinity been challenged in a way that's affecting young men. Maybe older men
Yeah.
a little bit less, but like young men, it really matters because the idea of masculinity and what it means to be a boy or a man is definitely changing, especially after the Me Too movement.
Yeah.
The idea of saying, hey, I don't really know who I am and my community is changing. I would like to learn more about it. We don't
Mhm.
have that conversation. Democrats don't really seem to have that conversation, or at least we haven't seen it.
Yeah.
What the alternative has been saying, get in line, or you're a xenophobe, or you're a homophobe, or you're a
Yeah.
racist, or a sexist, or misogynist. That will automatically push people to the right. And it has
Yeah.
pushed people to the right rather than
Yeah.
sitting down with them and just saying, let's talk. Let's have a
Yeah.
conversation and let's see if we can find some common ground as to why this trans person is not very different from you.
Yeah.
We don't have that.
There's no nuance anymore when describing the other side. All Republicans are MAGA if you're a Democrat.
At least
Media,
the far
you
left.
know? No, but that's what I'm saying. All the information that is being shoved on people is this idea that if they're a Democrat, they're a far lefty,
Yeah.
that legalize
Yeah.
all the drugs.
Yeah.
Or if they're a Republican, they're a Capitol storming MAGA right extremist. What we've gotten away from is this idea that, hey, there are people that see both sides who vote Republican, who see both sides that vote Democrat. If you can just get people together to have a conversation about the things that separate them
Mhm.
and have them talk to each other instead
Yeah.
of telling each side that side's the enemy, that side's the enemy, you are never going to accomplish anything if you don't get that.
And not only that, but you are actively going to have people like Donald Trump exploiting that sense of confusion because what
Yes.
exactly happened? He
Yes.
expertly ran in multiple swing states a very poignant ad that said, she's for they, them, he's for you. And he
Yeah.
ran it relentlessly in swing states. And it was effective.
And
It
it
showed in focus groups
worked.
that it moved the needle by like average
Yeah.
2.1%.
It
And
was
it's
big.
not
That was a big one.
it's both the LGBT community, but it also deals with a little bit of politics because it tells you that the Democrats are more focused on giving tax incentives to trans rights and all of these equal opportunities for people who aren't you. And then Trump
Yeah.
capitalized on that by saying, the definition of masculinity when you could say things again, when you weren't automatically assumed guilty because of an accusation,
Yeah.
we are the place for you. We are the people for you where you can be free again. And this is what it means to be a man. Trump capitalized on that insecurity and just ran with it.
Yeah, and we're not here to talk about whether that's the right message or the wrong message. The point is, it was an effective message. And the Dems have to figure out what is a counter to that message. Or if not a counter, how do you take that message, make it your own, and come back in 4 years and do better? you know?
Yeah.
And I don't think it's beyond the Democratic Party's ability to do. The Democratic Party is great at being inclusive with the group they want to be inclusive with.
The identity politics only goes as far as somebody's wallet. And
Yeah.
when you have periods of high inflation and then you have your main ticket item in proposition being abortion, which ultimately does not drive as many men out as they would like, then you end up with something like this. And it doesn't, again, it is exclusionary to the point where, yes, these young impressionable men are like, okay, there's pro-feminism, and it's very hard for them to determine whether it means everybody gets a seat at the table or it's reverse sexism and it's now male exclusionism.
Yeah.
And
And
again, that's something that the Republicans capitalized on.
and the Democrats made it more confusing, I think, by that message of like real masculinity is standing up for your woman. I don't think that that was an effective message. It
Right.
didn't
No,
work.
exactly. You're right. Because what happened was it was first woman president. Okay, great. Perfect. I mean, she was right to not focus on that because then she really would look like a DEI hire. But also, it
Mhm.
was like, this is a woman's first, a woman's this, a woman's that, which is great. But then you have all of these like young, impressionable men going, okay, where do I fit in there? And then
Yeah.
the response from the Democrats and like Michelle Obama was, you get to vote for her. it's not a winning message.
Yeah, it takes all the power away from that young Gen
Mm,
Z man. Making statements like that takes the power away from that young Gen Z man. It says, you don't get to define what masculinity is. We get to define what masculinity is for you, and you just have to adhere to what we say it is.
yeah,
That's never going to win over that demographic of people.
no.
By telling them what they are is not what is not a good idea in any demographic in a political campaign.
Yeah. And to the feminists out there, I mean, like the majority of feminists out there believe that everybody deserves an equal seat at the table. Great. But
Yeah.
then there was a small group of feminists who believe that it's almost like revenge and it's male exclusionism. And to those people, I would say, okay, you can say that men don't deserve X, Y, and Z, or we don't have to cater to the male voter here because we're independent women. Okay, the young men and non-college voters just lost you the election.
Yeah. And
We
that's not
need
to
everybody.
and that's not to say that there aren't far right misogynists that, aren't on the same level. The point
Mhm.
is, apparently you don't need to worry about that demographic to win an election. You
No.
know, this is not what is right, it is what is
Yeah.
effective.
Yeah, there are a lot of demographics you don't have to worry about. Like, if I could quote John Stewart real quick, who somebody when somebody asked him, "Don't you worry about anti-Semitism?" And he goes, no." He's like, "In my opinion, anti-Semitism will be fine." It it has
Yeah.
stood the test of time for decades and decades. Now let's get to the portion of the podcast which we'll be talking about extensively for the next few months, Trump's cabinet picks. Trump has already been very active and quick about picking some of his cabinet picks, some of which will need Senate confirmation and some won't. There's some news in Trump's dealings with that process, and we'll see how that goes. But he has so far confirmed at least a dozen names into governmental and seemingly non governmental positions in his cabinet.
He wasted absolutely no time dropping that list. I think it was within 3 days or so of him winning. Yeah.
Within 3 days, essentially, almost like the next day, his first pick, Susie Wiles, chief of staff. Now, Susie Wiles is one of his main campaign advisors. She was hired on around 2021, became CEO of Trump's Save America Pact. She and Chris LaCivita are pretty much the main reasons why Trump won this election to begin
Yeah.
with. She's a highly, highly decorated political operative from Florida. She will be the first woman to fill that role.
She's very, very good at her job. She's just effective. She's effective in what she does.
The next one that we'll talk about, the Attorney General. And Trump's pick for the Attorney General, Representative Matt Gaetz of Florida.
Uh,
Matt Gaetz, one of Trump's biggest defenders, voted to remove House Speaker Kevin McCarthy after working in a bipartisan fashion with Democrats. This
I,
guy,
I don't think I'm alone. And I understand that this is not objective at all. I have a hard time looking
uh,
at that man's face.
you said that. I was literally just pulling up pictures of his face.
I don't know. It's just something about him. He looks like the kid that got you in trouble and like didn't get blamed for it. His unwillingness to work with Democrats is very concerning from a nonpartisan standpoint.
There's a lot of legal power that he will have once
Yeah.
taking this position. Now, this does need Senate confirmation. There's been a little bit of pushback so far. We should note that one of the things that Trump is trying to do is to advocate for the next Republican majority leader of the Senate to have them go on extended recess, just so Trump can push some of these nominees through without
Yeah.
needing Senate approval. Which to me
Yeah.
is kind of strange because you just won over the Senate. What reason could you possibly have to want to push people out into recess so
Mhm.
you could have these people confirmed without needing Senate confirmation if you thought that your entire Republican electorate would vote for them?
Yeah. And honestly, Matt Gaetz is one of those individuals that I think he's worried about with that, is because Matt Gaetz pissed off a lot of people during the Kevin McCarthy situation. He pissed off a lot of people in the Senate.
Mostly traditional Republicans.
Yes, yeah. I remember watching a lot of newsreels of traditional Republicans talking about how much they did not like him.
And
Um,
mind you, that bipartisan work was to prevent the government from shutting down.
yes.
On a base level, he barely has any sort of legal experience in terms of
No,
being able to
no.
run the highest legal position in the country.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, we will see. Next one will need Senate confirmation. Senator Marco Rubio, Trump's pick for the Secretary of State. This is an interesting one because
Mhm.
Rubio, I would argue, has more of the traditional Republican values and experience. He's not
Yeah.
quite MAGA, but he at least has some of the experience in order to do the job. Maybe not the way that some people would like, but he does bring a lot of experience to the
Yeah.
table.
Me being as a big international relations and foreign policy guy, I am very pleased that Marco Rubio is one of the few people in Trump's cabinet that has championed maintaining international alliances with NATO.
Yep,
He's been
he's
very
really like
vocal
that.
about that. Now,
Mhm.
my concern with that is that Trump has been equally as vocal about making NATO pay for what he perceives to be American costs in world issues. And Trump has never had a problem firing someone who's told him no before.
Yeah.
And my thing is, I don't know how much championing he can do for international relations with NATO when his boss is someone who has shown in the past that he will fire people if they don't agree with him. All we can really do is wait and see what he does on that front. I think one of the main area in which him and Trump align on is that he is a big China hawk.
Some of the experience that he is the member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He's the top Republican of the Senate Intelligence Committee. You already said how he's big on anti-China and he's big on championing maintaining relationships with groups like NATO, which will be very interesting considering the next person that we have to talk about who is very anti-NATO and anti-United Nations, which is
Oh,
Representative New York Representative Elise Stefanik, who is Trump's pick for ambassador to the United Nations, one of the biggest anti-United Nations representatives that we could possibly have in the House, is now the ambassador to the
to the
United
United
Nations.
Nations. I don't understand this pick. I understand this pick from Trump's viewpoint. Rationally, I don't understand this pick. Like, you would
Yeah,
assume that the person that you would want to pick for a position working with the UN would want a cordial relationship with the UN. Elise Stefanik does not care or want any kind of cordial relationship with the UN. She is fully on board with Trump's idea to have the UN and NATO pay for US costs. We've never been in a position where somebody who is so anti UN has been made a UN ambassador.
not even like
At
Nikki
least not in our
Haley wasn't
lifetime.
even anti-UN.
Yeah.
What I'm interested in seeing from her is because she doesn't have a whole lot of international experience. She is the number four House Republican as chair of the House Republican Conference. But what I'm interested in seeing is she's going to go in fully with Trump's agenda of having our allies pay for aid. And
Yeah.
NATO allies and United Nations alike, she's going to go in saying that if you do not pay a certain bill, you do not get the aid. And that includes Ukraine. So I'm going to be very interested in seeing if that rhetoric holds up or if they're kind of brought back down to reality when the time comes. If she
Yeah.
gets approved by the Senate, and that's also another thing that we have to wait on.
And there's something to be said about a shift to the right on a global scale that might play to her benefit as well.
Yep. All right. You ready to
I
talk
know
about the
I
next ones?
writer. I know that this is your favorite. This is your favorite section
Oh,
right coming up right
son of
now.
a bitch. All right. Heading the brand new Department of Government Efficiency, also known as Doge.
Oh my god.
Trump's picks for heading that department is Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy.
For those of you who don't get the joke like I didn't earlier today, and Ryder had to explain it to me, Dogecoin is the name of the cryptocurrency that Elon Musk created. So
Yep.
I find it both cringe and hilarious.
If you remember just outside of the pandemic, how Dogecoin and all of these other cryptos were just booming. And then this was right around the time of the apes and everything with AMC.
Yeah.
Elon Musk created the Dogecoin, and it was one of the biggest Ponzi scheme, scam, fake, worthless, just pure worthless crypto that was out there. And this guy, and for every one of Elon Musk's faults, from offering people $1 million to sign a nothing petition in Pennsylvania by the time that they were eligible to vote, to his weird trucks, to the fact that he looks like Elon Musk looks and acts like what somebody dared an alien to act like if they wanted to be a human. It's like charades, and he picked human. That's exactly what an alien would do and say, is everything Elon Musk would do and say. Now, Vivek Ramaswamy, for all his faults, which there are many, Vivek Ramaswamy has more of a grasp on government if that grasp is around the neck area and is very hard. So let's talk about the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. So Trump has already applied. This is a brand new department, mind you. They don't need any Senate confirmation because this isn't a real department, pretty much. Trump has implied
that this government wouldn't have any formal part of the government. They would just be a advisory organization.
Yeah. And now, what would that advice be for? So, Department of Government Efficiency. Well, let's see. Both Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk have both championed throughout the entire campaign that they plan on cutting the U.S. federal governmental budget by a third, by like what, $2 trillion or something like that?
Yeah.
And it was even cheered at Madison Square Garden that he would cut this. First of all, it's almost impossible unless you plan on going after things like Department of Education, Social Security, Medicare. If you just cut everybody from the government, you wouldn't even put a dent in that $2 trillion. And so if that's really their plan, their advice on where to cut next, I mean, good luck doing that without cutting into major programs that we need.
Yeah. And as far as Elon Musk goes, I don't understand how putting the man who said he was going to make Twitter more efficient. Well, first of all, he was going to name it X and then make it more efficient, and then hemorrhaged all that money from that organization. How that man is the one who's going to make the government more efficient.
Not to mention that he and some of the other richest people in the world instantly made like $26 billion off of Trump's win. That guy is going to learn how to be more efficient.
To me, that was one of the grossest bit of news that I got out of this campaign, was how much money he made off of this.
Yeah. Also, the guy who's championed being for the working class, and this is where the blind spots are that the Democrats really have to work on, and providing this information to the working class people, is that, the guy who championed firing labor or union workers, and the guy who's one of the biggest threats to the auto industry with electric vehicles, he's the guy championing the working class movement.
The man who joked with Donald Trump on an X interview,
on a faulty X live stream.
Yeah, about firing his employees.
And then Trump praising him for doing it.
Yeah, that guy.
Yep. So the next one's going to need Senate confirmation. Who do we got?
Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense. He's a Fox News anchor on Fox and Friends. He's an Army combat veteran from Iraq and Afghanistan and Guantanamo Bay, and he was the author of The War on Warriors: Behind the Betrayal of the Men Who Keep Us Free, which rails against what he calls the warped, woke, and caustic policies of the current military.
So, I mean, this goes back into the identity politics, is that the Republicans have very smoothly claimed that the LGBT representation in the military has made us weaker. If you were to kind of just take a note from what they're saying, just the LGBT community is just running rampant through the military, which it is not. And even if it was, it wouldn't have any effect on how the military actually operated if you completed fucking training. But, but he, being Secretary of Defense, one of his main things is going to be going through and probably purging a lot of those laws, allowing certain people to be in the military.
And he's another individual who's going to need Senate confirmation as well.
Yep. That'll be interesting because he spent his last few years as a Fox News anchor. He was considered for the first term, but he was overlooked by somebody else. Next on the docket, we got Tulsi Gabbard as the Director of National Intelligence. Now, Tulsi Gabbard, she served in the Army National Guard, represented Hawaii as a Democrat from 2013 to 2021 before becoming an independent in 2022. She lacks experience in intelligence matters, so that's good to know. She opposed U.S. interventions in Ukraine and Syria. So, as the Director of National Intelligence, it's going to be interesting to see how we continue aid to Ukraine if we do at all. She's going to need Senate confirmation, which is going to be testy given the fact that, one, she's an independent, even though
Yeah.
Trump claims that she's clearly a Republican now. But because of her opposition to certain things like that and her lack of experience in intelligence matters, we'll see what her Senate confirmation looks like. Next, we got John Ratcliffe as director of the CIA. That's going to need Senate confirmation as well. He's a former U.S. rep, served as director of national intelligence under the first term. He's a deep skeptic of our intelligence agencies. Perfect role for him then. He investigated Hunter Biden and the FBI's usage of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. This is going to be one that's interesting to watch because Trump disliked the former director of the CIA, Gina Haspel, because she opposed the declassification of documents related to the investigation of Russian interference into the 2016 election. So
Yeah.
we're seeing a lot of instances in which Trump is inserting loyalists and specifically Project 2025 loyalists, because there are a lot of people on this list who are part of Project 2025, some of which we haven't even talked about yet. John Ratcliffe, director of the CIA, he's going to be one to look out for in terms of being a loyalist as the director of the CIA to Trump.
Yeah.
Mike Huckabee, U.S. ambassador to Israel. That's also going to need Senate confirmation. Mike Huckabee, father of Sarah Huckabee Sanders, Trump's former press secretary. He's the former Arkansas governor. He sought presidential nomination in 2008, 2016 to no avail. And then after he left office, he hosted a show on Fox News and a radio program. But now, three other ones, one of specific notation. Kristi Noem to the Department of Homeland Security. Thinker?
I mean, aside from the fact that she killed her 14-month-old dog Cricket, I don't really know a whole lot about her.
Now, first of all, she said she killed her 14-month-old dog Cricket because it was untrainable. Do you think that's the more egregious thing, going in the back and old yellering it? Or do you think it's more egregious that she named a dog the name of another species? Because I have more of a problem with that. It's like if I had a son and the first thing I named it was like antelope.
Exactly. There's not a whole lot about her, so I mean, we'll just have to wait and see. She also needs Senate confirmation. A lot of his needs Senate confirmation, and I'm sure that people have noticed a running theme throughout all these picks is a certain lack of experience in the area in which they are about to go do the job in.
Yeah. Well, she's a South Dakota governor in 2018, and before that, she spent 8 years in the House. But at the same time, she is the definition of MAGA echo chamber, because she has completely megaphoned every xenophobic, anti-immigration policy that Trump has suggested out there. One of the reasons why she's Department of Homeland Security director, or that she's the nominee for that, is because she, along with a lot of other people, would try to carry out Trump's big mass deportation plan on day one, which is why they're coming out with these names first, so they can start getting these people approved so they can get to work. Who would be under her? Well, the next person would be border czar Tom Homan. Homan's gained some notoriety over the past few years.
Well, he was the former director of ICE, and he's going to be in charge of the deportation of illegal aliens back to their country of origin. Now,
that's his claim, that they're all going to be illegal. We'll see. This is Tom Homan in his natural state, seen here telling a kid that his smile is too big. Tom Homan said in an interview, and Trump's plan of mass deportation would be implemented. Even he was on Sean Hannity the other day, and Sean Hannity asked him, well, don't you think the mass deportation plan is a little inhumane? To which Tom Homan, as a natural person with hearts and feelings and a soul, doubled down on the idea of putting kids in cages and splitting them up again. Now, whether or not that was intentionally done by Sean Hannity to try to give him an opportunity to show some more humanity in it, to quell some fears, who knows? Because he squandered that and he just doubled down in the fear mongering of the mass deportation. And if you don't think mass deportation in Project 2025 is going to happen, Tom Homan is the reason why this is going to happen. Now, Tom Homan, he's going to have help from Kristi Noem. They've said for years now that it's only going to be the wave of illegal immigrants. But at the same time, we've seen time and time again that he's
Yeah.
very much blurring the lines between legal
Yeah.
and illegal. And all Trump says, even Trump said on an interview, I don't remember if it was like CBS or somebody, he said, "Oh, you put one wrong person on a bus out of the country and the Democrats act like it's the end of the world. It's the worst thing that ever happened." It was like, yeah, because it's
Yeah.
the worst thing that ever happened. If you were taking that lackluster approach to sending legal US citizens out of the country, then yet
Yes.
one, it tells me you don't care about who you're putting on there as long as they somewhat seem illegal to you and feel
Yeah.
illegal to you. And two, it really shows that you're not bothering to kind of fine tune this, which makes sense because in the first time when they were going through all this political stuff and they were just going for political points, they flagged almost everybody who wasn't born in this country, and I got flagged by ICE and had my assets frozen. So that was really great. Which just shows you for political points,
Oh,
it's so loosely done and it's being done by almost the same people, if not more incompetent people like
yeah.
Kristi Noem, which brings
Yeah.
us to the final person
Yeah.
that we have to talk
Well,
about.
yeah, speaking of kids in cages, the man
Yeah.
responsible of
Yep.
kids being in cages the last time Trump was in office, Stephen Miller, who will be
Yay.
who does not need confirmation. So he
Yep.
will be the deputy chief of
Now,
staff for Homeland Security. This is the
most,
man who
yeah.
said that America should be for Americans and Americans only.
Yep. This guy, deputy chiefs of staffs and chiefs of staffs, because they're not secretary positions, they don't need Senate confirmation. So all Stephen Miller is going to continue to do, like he did before, is just be the whisper in Trump's ear, nudging him to certain policies. So the specific policies, again, Homeland Security, exactly
Mhm.
working with Kristi Noem and Tom Homan. Also, staff for policy, the policy towards immigration. I mean, if you want to talk about the kids in cages fiasco, yes, like this is the man
Mhm.
responsible for all of that
Yes.
chaos and said that
Yeah.
they would double down on it. And again, when you
Yeah.
say things like America is for Americans only, I don't care if you're on the campaign trail. They've said multiple times, they have been very clear as to the specific look of what constitutes an American.
And they've not been very good about being specific in the past. I am not hopeful about their ability to be specific. Is that going to extend to dreamers?
Yeah.
Like, like what?
The,
Where does
well,
that line? Where does that line start and end?
it starts with the temporary protected status of the Haitian migrants in Springfield. That's where it
Yeah.
starts. It starts where those programs, which JD Vance has already called out for being illegal, even though it's absolutely not. So it calls out
Yes.
for those people. It calls out for illegals. Now, how do you find those illegal immigrants without working with local law enforcement to raid entire towns and cities of people who you suspect to be illegal? Which tells me stop and frisk is coming back. It tells me
Yeah.
that there's going to be a mass fight between municipal and federal law enforcement to try to figure out how to go about doing this, or even if it's legally possible to do, because that would
Yeah.
also involve getting the military involved. Can you deploy the National Guard to do this? Which a lot of
Yeah.
legal analysts argue you cannot. And so this is going to be an endless fight to try to figure out a way to have guns pointed at people who look like illegals,
Yeah.
whether they are or aren't.
But what needs to be understood is that every single aspect of Trump's cabinet is going to be working with other aspects of the cabinet. You
No,
look
yeah,
at
I know.
you look at legal questions involved with this.
Mhm.
You bump it right back up to Matt Gaetz as
Yeah.
Attorney General. If they decide to try and force the National Guard to go in and, help with mass deportations, who's to say
Mhm.
that Matt Gaetz as Attorney General doesn't make moves to try and make that legal? And I'm not
Mhm.
saying that that will or will not happen. I'm just saying that every single part of his cabinet has been put there because ideally they are going to work with other members of the cabinet to see Trump's America realized.
Yep, yep, exactly. Last one we have to talk about today is former New York Congressman Lee Zeldin. He will be head of the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. This will need Senate confirmation as well. This is the
Mhm.
man himself, Lee Zeldin, seen here trying to see if he can combat climate change with the force. Lee Zeldin ran for governor in 2022, but it was defeated by Kathy Hochul.
Mhm.
He came straight from the Army and he served as House Foreign Affairs Committee and House Financial Services Committee.
So
What does that say?
lots of experience with the environment.
Yeah, like the House Financial Services Committee and Foreign Affairs. You know, those
Uh,
foreign trees, man, they just keep sweeping over through the monsoons
yeah.
over on Florida soil.
Oh my goodness.
But you're absolutely right. Is that the biggest thing about him is that he is super anti-regulation, anything environmental. And that is
Yeah.
one of the biggest portions in Project 2025, other than white nationalism and anti-abortion, is that he's big on deregulating environmental regulations. That means
Yeah.
like NOAA, that means the National Park Service, in order to be able to drill and
That
frack.
it means implementing Trump's policy of drill, baby, drill.
Yep.
For anybody who loves the environment, this is a concerning pick for the EPA.
Well, for those who didn't think that Project 2025 was going to be immediately implemented or implemented at all, or didn't think that it was serious, all you have to do is look at Lee Zeldin. All you have to do is look
Mm.
at Stephen Miller, Tom Homan, Kristi Noem, Elise Stefanik, Matt Gaetz. Like Project 2025 is here.
Yes.
It's forming before our very eyes in
Mhm.
terms of Trump loyalists and Project 2025 authors.
Yeah. They talked about abortion in relation to 2025 a lot during the
Mhm.
campaign. And I think it says a lot that that has not come up in his cabinet picks, or at least it's not at the forefront of things to notice in relation to 2025 as as that subject relates to his cabinet picks.
In terms of like anti-abortion stuff, if they were going to like defund mifepristone or things like that, that would probably come from the Department of Health and Human Services, which they're floating RFK for that position. Or you could have Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy's Doge department cut federal funding for things like that,
Yeah.
or even like
uh,
informational access to stuff like that. I know they've already floated cutting the tax incentives for public access radio and media like NPR,
yeah.
which why, but okay. There are certain people that they don't want in this administration, like the Mike Pompeos or the Nikki Haley's in this administration, which tells me that Steve Bannon and Donald Trump Jr. are at the helm of this hiring squad
Yes.
because they're actively picking people who are at their very core Trump loyalists. And this is what we
Yes.
said before. Trump wants nothing but loyalists. He doesn't want experts around him telling him what he doesn't want to hear or what might be
That
better for the
was
country. He wants people who will agree with him.
And one of the biggest points of Project 2025, one of their biggest goals was to A, get someone sympathetic to their views in office and surround that person with loyalists. We still have to go through confirmations, and it's not a guarantee that all of these people will pass confirmations.
Provided the fact that Trump doesn't get the Senate majority leader to
That's
put the
right.
Senate on recess to be able to avoid Senate confirmation. Provided that doesn't
Yes.
happen and sideswiping the government again, then
Yeah.
yeah, then we'll see how these people fare in front of the Senate. I mean, it's a Republican-led Senate anyway. Hopefully, if they're on message about anything, it's probably going to be the first thing that they do as a uniform Senate. There are going to be more to come. We'll be talking about them all extensively as they come out.
Yeah.
What can we do? The only thing I could say that we do as a party here going forward is staying informed, staying
Yeah.
politically active. There's never been more of a time to be more politically active than now. This is not a time to take a knee, take an L. Go take a nap if you have to. Go drink a little if you
Yeah.
need to, but like come back because this is the time to be informed.
Trust me. I understand the overwhelming desire to shove your head in the sand, but we can't. We just can't.
The day after the election, I took a walk in the park and I smacked my head on a branch and I couldn't for a second remember if I meant to or not. But we're fine.
What did I
We're
do the day
fine.
after the election?
You
I
probably
think I
napped
drank a
because we were
lot.
up all night doing the live stream.
Yeah, we napped a lot and then I drank.
Yeah.
um,
We're gonna be fine if we stay attentive, if we stay alert.
all we can
Yep.
do is take things as they come, educate ourselves on what those things are when they happen,
Yep.
and just roll with the punches.
Don't wait until 2028 to be informed. Don't wait until 2028 to be a volunteer somewhere to learn a little
Take
bit
the
more
next
about the process and influence.
take the next 4 years to become more educated about the political landscape so that when 2028 comes, you know exactly where you stand.
But until then, we will be the tool to give you everything that you might need on a weekly basis. We'll be back next week with whatever else is going on, and we will have a plethora of content for the next 4 years at least. And we're holding ourselves to the two main mantras, which is protect the vulnerable and defend the truth. And until then, we will continue to do that week in and week out. Stay safe, stay informed, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week, guys.